Okay, I'm back now.
Alrighty, welcome back. So on the topic of Fortify, how I mentioned that I was using Ground Slam on my Cascader to get it, I was just saying to people that I don't really feel like it's an issue because anyone who's getting Fortify, the way in its current design, is taking either a risk or making a sacrifice in their clear speed to be able to get that buff. So I was spending like 1 second making a Ground Slam in order to get a 5-second damage mitigation buff. So it wasn't like, it didn't feel broken to me, but how do you guys feel about its availability to other builds?
Ground Slam is really I mean, any melee skill with very long range is the tricky point. Like, we turned it off on the counterattacks just because that was free for any character with a melee weapon to get at that point.
Yeah, yeah.
And if we could do something to have it so it isn't granted by like a long range Ground Slam attack, but is a short one, probably not possible, but if that was an option, then I would jump at the opportunity. We'll have to see how it plays out, whether everyone ends up running a Ground Slam. I mean, if it becomes a mandatory thing for everyone to have Fortify, even if it is something they're taking a little bit of risk for, that's bad. But if it's an optional thing, if you choose to put your character in harm's way to stay out of harm's way, then that's a good thing. Even if it is, if the theme is melee only.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, there's not much you can do. I mean, Ground Slam's tagged as melee, and I can't think of another way you'd be able to do it.
Yeah, sort of putting downsides on having the Fortify buff, but then that just feels like we're punishing you for trying to do something different.
Yeah, it's something that's like, as you were saying, like defense isn't usually that fun, but it's mandatory, so you don't really want to be punished for having defense. Yeah, no, fair enough.
Yeah.
It doesn't, from my testing so far, I mean, it's only early days, but from my testing so far, it doesn't seem like something, it seems like the trade-off is there, so that even if it does sort of become mandatory, that everyone won't use it because the trade-off is there. Well, I guess not mandatory, but highly desirable. Though that does sort of bring up the next sort of topic about, we talked about EB, we talked about melee, and we talked about defense. And the contentious issue is regarding EB. I mean, I feel like from a usability standpoint and the advantage you get from it, EB is kind of okay. It's it's getting there, but defensive options for spellcasters seem pretty lacking. Like, you can build mana and you can go Might of Mana. I just got one shot by a Leaf Slam. I'm very squishy at the moment, guys. I built my character for maximum exploitation and not for effectiveness. Rip. And this goes to prove a point, maybe a little bit. Not really, but yeah. What are you guys' thoughts on defensive options for casters at the moment?
So we want to change Arctic Armor. I won't say how, because chances are it will change 50 times over before you guys see any change. But that as a defensive option, being less of a specifically completely mitigates some monsters and does nothing against others. I mean, yeah, it'll still do that to an extent, but it won't be as extreme. And other than that, like pushing Energy Shield a bit further, obviously that's a core defensive thing for casters if they just go through their base class stuff. The answer might be if casters are a bit squishier now, then monster damage doesn't need to be as high, or we can reduce the number of hard-to-avoid mechanics, things like that. There's no simple solution to just giving them more defensive tools or giving them more effect. There's probably going to be a little bit of everything gets a little bit better, or it changes a little bit to be a little more catch-all.
Yeah, so I definitely agree that EB might have amount of Arctic Armor for the amount of investment you got and the amount of defensive power it had. It was there was a reason pretty much everyone ran it. So I definitely agree that needed to be changed. Though it still feels like, even though it's not as easy to do, it still feels almost like I really want to go Arctic Armor Mind Over Matter still. I still really want to do that because I've played 2 casters now, and the defensive strategy has been to get some block, to get some as much armor as I can handle getting while still running EB, so still having armor ES gear. I can I sacrifice a bit of ES to wear a chest armor, pure armor base? I have a little bit more armor. Running your double granite, running your 4 endurance charges, and even then, it's still pretty squishy with 4.5k HP and getting up to 75% armor. Even though when you've got all your buffs up, it's very reliant on you having all of your buffs up. It's almost like playing like a
Right.
Perma Immortal Call Abyssus character constantly as a spellcaster at the moment. You know, it's like the moment you don't have your buffs all up, and you get charged by a roar from off screen. Goodbye.
A few things like, I mean, like the off-screen roller charges have been reduced, and there's been a little bit less of the surprise one-shots. Like, we've been trying to reduce that a little, but we don't want to like kill off those mechanics entirely that those monsters are using. So yeah, it's a little bit of changes all over the place, and adjustments will continue on a grand scale. So yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a simple solution that I can tell you what we're going to do. But
yeah, well, it's going to be. I think it's going to be an iterative thing, like you said, throughout the beta. I look forward to seeing what you guys test and to seeing how it works out, feeling it out. Though if you do make rowers stop charging and leapers leaping from off screen, I will be I will be happy.
I'm pretty sure we were making AI adjustments on that to make it so it's less all at once, but I'm not. I wouldn't promise anything.
Yeah, all the Arctic leapers are my most hated mob in the game. All those guys leaping at the exact same time and then using Arctic Breath at the exact same time. Oh man.
I think they may have been changed already. I'm not 100% sure. Those guys in particular, they're not. You're not the only person who hates those guys. So
yeah,
they're going to be changed. They're going to be changed somehow. Maybe just give them all GMP and multi-strike. No, I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Multi-leap slam, and then a chaos station aura as well. Wait a minute, that sounds familiar.
We'll have it like mirror arrow, but leap slam on those guys. Yeah, that'll work.
It leaves a clone behind as well. Oh my god.
Or just 100 summons leaping clones. Yeah,
please.
Yeah.
So on the theme of defensive options, then the other contentious one was being Ondar's Guile, which I feel like was EB and Ondar's Guile were like a pair in the fact that they were just keystones you could pick up, and you would pretty much always pick up, and they didn't really have a drawback. You didn't really have to build around them. They were just good.
Yeah, the stats confirm this. This is exactly what we were seeing, and exactly why those two were changed.
Yes, because they didn't feel very Path of Exile to me. The idea that you had to build around things and think about things and whether it was a good decision. It was just like, get this.
Yeah. The opportunity cost did not match the defensive boost that you got from it. So yeah, that was one of. I mean, Mark Neon Spider was the one who was very keen on that. Wait, probably shouldn't throw him under the bus like that. But he was the one that was. It's his fault. So he wanted to make the change. Yeah. His original suggestion was like double or like half for melee and double for ranged evasion, but we made tweaks and adjustments to it, and the values are continuing to change. I'm sure they're not going to stay at their final values, but it needed a downside, and obviously EV needed to not double dip and just be huge amounts of give near infinite mana regen.
Yeah. So I guess I've seen Ondar's Guile float back and forth a little bit. It was at 30% more, and then it's at 40% more now. Like, how are you guys feeling about it from where it's at the moment, the 40%?
I wouldn't be the one to answer that question, although Mark is messaging me right now, being so I think he feels a little bit betrayed that I called him out. I mean, that I blamed him for that. So yeah. I'll ask him how he feels about Ondar's Guile.
Poor Neil Spider. I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, sorry, my bad. I probably shouldn't have given him credit for that little. But no, it's for the greater good. I fully support him.
I mean, yeah.
So, yeah.
I support it. I think the Ondar's Guile chain was warranted and needed and positive for the game overall. The main questions for it have been like, obviously just like the balance and how it works out to be, but the main question has been like reflect and that. But now the reflect mechanics are actually changing as well, so that's not all on Ondar's Guile, like, oh, Ondar's Guile's nerfed and custom mistaken Mortal Call Enduring Cry is, not the same anymore. How do we deal with reflect? But now the actual reflect mechanics are changing as well, so that kind of, they go together, and the responsibility isn't just on Ondar's Guile and it being, good or not good. So, how much do you know about reflect? Can we ask you about reflect at all? the changes to it?
You can ask me. Yeah, you can ask me. But I mean, I made the changes with changing it to a rare and a bloodline mod. So yeah, I can answer some stuff about what it is now if you want.
Okay, so just to confirm, the new Reflect is, rather than being an elemental aura or a physical aura affecting a pack and all the monsters around, it's a singular mob buff on a rare monster, and it is reflecting both types of damage. Still not chaos though, right?
Still not chaos. No, it's elemental and physical. It's possible that we'll split them up, but it's more likely that we'll tweak the values or change the mechanic. I'm more keen to play with how we do the mechanic, and rather than just to make it so that it's like sometimes it just doesn't affect you at all. So yeah, it's in its most basic form at the moment. Like it was very quick to just implement. Like it was pretty much the tech that was already there. We just got new art for it that hopefully makes it more visible.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. I was going to say that. I like the idea of, you said that doesn't affect you sometimes. I like the idea of a Reflect that occasionally drops, so it's not up all the time, so that you can play around it. So rather than building around it, you can play around it instead, but you have a drawback then of having to wait for the Reflect to drop or something like that. I guess you guys are thinking about that idea as well?
That was one of the options, yeah. We decided to try the simplest version first. Then another thing was discussed was putting it on the player. Like the monster has a thing that puts it on the player so that you can actually, or you can always see when it's happening because it's happening to you.
It's like a debuff. It debuffs you. Okay.
Yeah. But it's more likely that the monster will do it on itself when you're close, if we do the buff on you thing. But we're trying it out with the rare thing and the bloodline. Like it's a bloodline pack mod at lower values now, like much lower values than the aura ever was. So we'll see how that plays out. It's definitely one of the things that we're glad we have a beta, so we can see if it just straight up murders people, which it did with my initial values that I put in. I kind of went a little high on the first set of values we gave it. It was like 44% reflected, which is now back down to 17% of the damage reflected.
How do you feel where it's at now? Because I think I heard I'm playing a totem build, so I totally can't tell at all. But how do you feel about where it's at? People were saying before it was like absolutely overtuned, like rippy one shot no matter what you were using, even if you're using an auto attack. And then now people are saying that it's like not even noticeable. Or at least that's what I've heard.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, it's a tricky mechanic because it scales entirely on player damage, and player damage skyrockets very quickly, like way above player life and defenses. And so unless it's really a philosophy question of, do we force players to always be prepared for Reflect, or is it possible to make an in-game build that doesn't use totems or traps or other proxies, and can hit and crit a monster without dying instantly?
Yeah, well, this is people often ask or say to me, just get rid of Reflect. I hate Reflect. Why is it even in the game? And my answer is always like, I'd hate to see a Path of Exile without Reflect. Like that's like it's like a soft cap for people just stacking DPS. That's kind of like the idea, to trivialize the game. I guess that's the intention, right?
That's kind of why we can't remove it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's ways to get huge amounts of damage and no defense very easily, and this is the one thing that we have to make sure it never happens, unless you're using Southbound, apparently. But yes, yeah, I'm keen to play around with it a few more, have some more versions of it. We've got, we're changing Thistle Sage, I think that's his name, the guy that has like a built-in Reflect buff, so that instead he's got a damage taken Stormcall, so he kind of has Reflect, but it's avoidable, and as long as you keep moving and so on.
Yeah.
So that's another form of Reflect that guy. I mean, I assume it's going to be on beta soon.
That's
so
a very cool idea.
See it in action. If that turns out well, then that would be awesome. Like, we would do it with projectiles if it wasn't for melee. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
There was
I like that idea. That's cool.
I think it was with Nemesis, maybe. The programmers tried to make one where if you hit it with a projectile, it reflects the projectile back at you, but man, that caused some crazy problems. So that's not an option, but it would be awesome if it was.
Okay, I thought I had something else, but I think I've forgotten what it was, so moving on. On the topic of kind of melee, can you say what the status on phase run is at all?
I can probably tell you that. We're currently trying it out. So it's similar to the old version, except it gives you phasing instead of the stat that didn't work. So it's pretty much a movement speed buff that gives you a damage bonus on your next hit and cancels on your next hit. We're probably going to give it a cooldown and possibly have the duration based on the number of frenzy charges and have it consume frenzy charges. So you can get a long movement boost and potentially a big damage boost. I don't know if the damage bonus will stack with it, will be affected by frenzy charges as well, but definitely it's more effective if you're consuming frenzy charges to use it. That's the current plan. It's still we're going to redo the effects hopefully, and it's going to have iteration, so it might change quite a bit. It might just not be fun, or might not fit with the game anymore, or it might just be a put it on your custom damage taken and forget about it thing. So we'll see how it plays out, but we're gonna try and get it in.
Hold on, it's gonna be a spell? Like
yeah, it's gonna be a spell. It's gonna be effectively in a cycle like Immortal Call.
Okay.
We talked for a while about having a cycle of Immortal Call, phase run, and an int equivalent that were all defensive buffs that were sort of defensive in the flavor of their attribute. Which I mean, in the end, we didn't come up with. The results weren't that great, but something like that is the plan.
Okay, so the issue a lot of, like, when people were asking about phase run, like, the issue a lot of people brought up, including myself, was that it would be broken with Herald, like, it would be broken with Ignite Proliferation, essentially. You would phase run, go for the big single hit, and then just destroy everything with Proliferation. Now, I would say that that's not an issue, since that Proliferation has been pretty effectively nerfed. Like, it seems like it's pretty decently nerfed. However, it seems like the Prolif... I haven't tested this yet. It seems like the Prolif nerf doesn't affect Herald of Ash Proliferation, though. So, is there any concerns there? Because it seems like that's, like, if you want to play early Prolif right now, it seems like going Herald of Ash Prolif is the best way to do it.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Like, Prolif pretty much turns any single target thing into an AoE, so we can't... It's the same sort of problem we used to have with GMP and single target projectiles. We couldn't make the single target projectile hit too hard because you can quintuple it by putting GMP on it. And we have the same thing with Prolif for just about everything that's this large single hit. So phase run might not get the big single damage boost. It might be a smaller ongoing thing, or it might be in a form that can't... Like, it could just poison the enemy for 100% of your damage over time or something like that if we really thought it was going to be an issue. We have the ability to try out a bunch of stuff with it. But yeah, Prolif is what we're keeping an eye on. Like, Prolif shield charge, phase run...
Yeah,
is going to be crazy if it goes in as is.
No, I hope I never see the day where shield charge builds are the dominant meta. It's a pet hate of mine, shield charge.
It's a skill that I've tried to rework in the past unsuccessfully. I got a few changes with this.
Yeah,
patch,
the
but,
like wind down at the end of it has been reduced, hasn't it? Which seems like one of the bigger issues with it.
I think so. Probably. I didn't make that change myself, so I'm not sure. But at some point, a programmer is going to make a whole new version of the skill that will then test out, and we could just replace the old one if it's better. Yeah.
So is there any sort of plans to change Herald of Ash proliferation, since it didn't really get nerfed the same that other proliferation did?
I haven't got round to looking at it yet, but it's probable it could get reduced area, it could get reduced damage. There's a bunch of numbers we can easily tweak with it.
Yeah.
Which is good. Like, these days when I try and design a skill, I try and design it with as many things that we can tune quickly and easily to get the balance in the right place, and it has those, so it's going to be a quick balance change and pretty easy to see what the results of it are. So we can probably expect changes if the other developers agree that it needs changes.
Yep, fair enough. Alrighty, cool. Well, maybe I'll make a Herald of Ash Prolif build in beta soon, and with like Vengeance or something. And what is it? No, Vigilant Strike. That one, not Vengeance. Vigilant Strike. And give that a go. So since I've accidentally mentioned Vengeance, a lot of people have been asking what's the intention behind counterattack skills. They seem to, I mean, I kind of like them, and they're like, you know, a little bit of added damage and stuff like that. You can't really, you know, you can't really get Fortify with them for obvious reasons, because that would be just like trivializing the getting of Fortify. What's kind of like the intention behind counterattacks, and where are they at the moment?
When I originally came up with the design for them, they were intended to solve the problem of if we nerf block into the ground, then block is going to be a terrible choice. So this gives you an offensive option. It was really because the only block offensive build you could get was with Temper Shield. It was like a spellcaster, which didn't really feel good if a character wanted to be a counter-attacky melee character. Then they didn't have the ability to do so without being a spellcaster. So it was there to fill that build role, and from what I've seen, it kind of does that okay, but 99% of the time you're better off just attacking monsters yourself and then just using it for the occasional damage boost, which is fine too. It's just another support option for melee characters. It kind of does what cast on damage taken was originally intended to do for spellcasters, where it's just an offensive bonus for being hit.
Didn't really work out that way, did it? Cast on damage taken.
Oh no, well, mainly because of the level restriction and the using for utility skills with the level 1 version of the skill.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it can be used that way. It's, again, being hit is not the most efficient way to play in Path of Exile. No. So
I always get people coming to me with these builds where it's like, you know, I want to set up all these custom damage takens and stuff like that. It's like, you know, or reflect builds, and like, the issue is you have to wait for a monster to punch you, and I mean, it just doesn't. It's just not a fast way to clear. I mean.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't pass the Val Oversoul test, that's for sure. So, yeah, and Vengeance is the same thing, where it's kind of, it does what it does well enough, like it fulfills the design goals, I guess, but it's never going to be a primary build. We offer it from the, you know, we offer the first, I guess, the block-based one from the level 4 gem reward, just because it's a utility thing that you put on in addition to your actual primary skills.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
always
they're pretty cool, and you can curse with them and stuff like that, and you can put like life gain hit on them or something, or, you know, they're alright. You chuck them in a spare gem slot. I think just some people were kind of hoping that they could do a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about for a while having it as a support gem that you can put on any melee attack, which we could still easily do. It's still a possibility. But then you had the situation of there's one gem that's better than any other to use with it, whatever that might be, based on the current meta. And so there's effectively one skill that is best as a counterattack. So we decided to release them as gems rather than supports, though. Even though you have less potential build diversity, you have much more controlled depth with it. You have clear rewards for picking it on a particular melee character. And ideally, you're giving up gem sockets that you could be using for something else. For some builds, this isn't the case, and in which case this is kind of a reward for those builds that can't run 5 auras. Even if it's a minor one, only procs when they're getting beaten on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Something that we missed when we were talking about defense was Immortal Call. A lot of people feel like the custom damage taken Immortal Call setup is nerfed into the ground. I ran it on my last character as one of those defensive layers that I felt like I had to run. And, you know, if you're feeding yourself endurance charges constantly with either war cries or, you know, other mechanics, currently it procs and you get your 2.5 seconds of protection, which seems pretty powerful. It is obviously heavily reliant on you being active and getting the buffs yourself. I guess, how do you guys feel at where Immortal Call is? Obviously doing like perma Immortal Call setups, so doing those Hegenita style builds where they keep their Immortal Call up all the time is not really very viable anymore, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the fact of the matter is, just like EB and Ondar's Guile, it was too ubiquitous. Everyone had the same 4-socket item on their character, on every in-game character, so it needed to change. The Enduring Cry was kind of accidental, an accidental addition to that. It wasn't intended, like, if we nerf both these things, then we destroy that. It was sort of, we make this Immortal Call change, and then after that change was made, we're like, oh, let's make this enduring cry change. So Immortal Call might not need to be have the values as low as they are now, but it's definitely we don't want people to keep up Immortal Call all the time without paying a pretty extreme cost to do so. Like people didn't take additional endurance charges and things like that, but now you definitely have a reason to, because you've got a cooldown, so every charge counts.
I grabbed an extra one, and it was a noticeable improvement, both to my when Immortal Core wasn't going off and to when it actually was. Yeah,
it's good. It's good step in the right direction. But yeah, it'll get more attention when phase run gets attention.
Yep.
So
okay.
Yeah, let's see how that plays out.
Cool. On the topic of buffs, Inner Force was removed. My theory that I usually tell people is that it was one of those things that was a bit of a balancing nightmare for you guys. Is that kind of the case there? What was the reasoning for removing it?
Yeah, it's pretty much the thing that I tout a lot is that we balance around the exploit case, and with the exploit case was becoming, I mean, there is an increasing number of buffs that players would have, so every patch Inner Force would just become a little bit more powerful when we released another buff that the character could have. The Heralds obviously pushed it up a little bit more, and the auras before that. And Fortify, Fortify was the thing that prompted the change. That was what made me say, okay, we need to decide what we're doing with buff effect, because currently a Witch and a Templar have better Fortify than a Duelist. Because of, and it's, so many builds took it. It was a very popular, like very high up on the stats of passives, that everyone travelled towards. Well, mainly casters, but yeah, it was too popular, and we would have to keep nerfing it if we kept it in the tree. Even
Didn't
if
you
we
like nerf Inner Force like 4
out.
times or something in its history? I think it's been nerfed like repeatedly over.
That's it would be before my time in that case. Well, I guess like it wouldn't have been me making those changes, but it sounds like the kind of thing that would make absolute sense and would need to happen.
Yeah, I feel like I remember seeing it nerfed heaps of times.
The fact that it multiplies with aura passives and so on top of everything else is, yeah.
Do you see any issues now that Inner Force has been removed with certain certain people relying on it? I mean, I would say Righteous Fire, but I don't think Righteous Fire needs to rely on it now. They have so many more options available for regen and mitigation of the degen. But there may be other case issues, none that I'm aware of, but are there any issues with the removal?
The trickiest part of making the change was trying to figure out what to put on the Life Notable by Templar, which is currently Aura Effect, just because that's the closest thing to it and still pretty thematic for the Templar. That was the part that was hard at the time. As for removing it, the effect is generally positive. It lets us buff things that we couldn't otherwise buff.
Yeah, because they would have been crazy with Inner Force, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we wanted to, we can just turn all the aura effect passives up by 1% on every one of them now, if we wanted to, but I don't know if it's necessary.
Something that I noticed was that, this is a super tiny thing, just curious. Let me get away from mobs. The Devotion passive had 5% buff effect on it before. I think it was 5%. And now it's got 3% aura effect. So aura effect is obviously less useful, but it's still less than the amount of buff, even though it was affecting the auras before. I don't know, any particular reason for that, or just...
just that the value was crazy high before, and we didn't want it to be as good as the leadership aura effect nodes. Wait, does it even have aura effect? I can't remember anymore. But yeah, we didn't want to make it as good as a passive, and considering it also had life and strength, I think it has strength.
Yeah, it does have strength as well. Yeah, fair enough. Just curious, random thing I was curious about.
Yeah.
So on the continuing topic of defense is the flavor of the day, man. People have been asking about changes to Leech and Vilepact. In what way and how are you planning on changing them?
There's some pretty extreme changes to Leech that we've been trying out. I probably shouldn't talk about them because they're like, they're completely reworking how the mechanic and the delay and stacking and all that stuff works. So there is a big plan to change Leech. We're going to try out the options and see how it plays. So far, the version we're trying isn't super promising, but we'll try it, we'll push it to its limits, and we'll try out other options with it and see which works best. So Leech is getting a rework, mostly for, I mean, with the intent of helping melee characters, having Leech be a bit more dependable and something they can better specialize in. And probably, like, the thing we're looking at most recently was pushing it more towards better for large packs, weaker for bosses. But exactly how we go about doing that remains to be seen.
That's interesting. It seems like Chris talked about making certain parts of the game really scary, and being able to face tank a boss just through Leech is not particularly scary, I guess. So is that kind of like connected there?
It certainly makes it hard for boss design. It was part. I mean, it came up in the same discussion as when Fortify was created and when the shotgunning change was removed. So it was a big change in the works for a while. It just hasn't seen fruition like the others have. So yeah, it's for melee that we want to make the change. We want to make Leech a melee thing, and casters can get it if they want on the supports.
Okay, alright. I guess I don't really have too many more questions about Leech, really. I know it's something people want to know a lot about, but it seems like it's just something that's being tested tonally at the moment, and some stuff will get rolled out.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely integral to a lot of characters, and it's kind of a thing that's flopped between, like, it's kind of a strength mechanic, but it's kind of a dex mechanic, and like Mana Leech is kind of a dex mechanic, but it's kind of an int mechanic too. And there's a bunch of stuff, like, everyone wants Leech, but not everyone should have as much as they have, or they don't have as much as they should have.
Yep.
Yeah. it's not a simple answer.
Leech is like a huge mess of a mechanic in action RPGs, because you either get things where like your health is flicking back and forth constantly, or it fully trivializes content, or you have survivability or no sustain on builds. I mean, that's a mess, isn't it? It's a nightmare.
Yeah, for boss design, I kind of like. I mean, the current version is nice and simple in that I can guarantee 20% life regen on a melee character, so that's what they have to deal with in a merciless boss fight. We can effectively do 20% of their life to them per second, and they can get it, as long as they're attacking, they can get away with it. Whenever Leech changes, it changes a lot of boss fights in a big way.
Okay.
For a while, with Itzuri was going to have reduced effective Leech on her, but then Leech was changed in the same patch, so it was removed in the end. But for a while, Leech trivialized the Itzuri fights for melee.
Yep, fair enough. How do you feel like the bosses are going in Act 4 so far, the rollout? You do a lot of boss design and balancing, right?
Yeah, so both of them have new mechanics. Both Duresso and Calm have new mechanics coming, which I can probably tell you about today. Where Calm will, the skulls on spikes all around his arena.
Yeah.
Yes, something happens with them. Maybe I'll let you see it when it actually comes. Yeah, I'll just tease that. And Duresso is getting some spinning swords in his arena, because it didn't have enough spinning swords.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, his arena has nowhere near enough
effects.
swords in it. That's definitely something I feel like.
Yeah, exactly. So, spinning attack swords are going to turn up in his arena at some point. We'll be testing that out and seeing how it plays. And the fights turned out okay. Like, I designed both the fights, well, I guess all the boss fights a long time ago, and now we're finally sort of, it's been like half a year between them being designed and actually being playable. And luckily we've had the chance to iterate on them quite a bit. Like, the fights changed quite a bit during development, and Duresso's going to continue to be tweaked with his attacks, so he feels a bit more natural. Like, Duresso, over the development of the boss fight, got a bunch of AI stuff, so he behaves a little smarter, but it still seems quite erratic.
Yeah, he's a little bit jittery, kind of. I find, erratic is a good word for it, I suppose.
One of the tricky things is, like, signaling in boss fights, because in a way you want to signal people so they don't die randomly out of nowhere, but at the same time you don't want to just draw red circles on the ground and just have it be a game of don't stand in the red circle, or don't
I hate that.
Like, you don't want it to be you don't want it to just be dancing left and right the whole time. You want to actually be watching what they're doing, and you want to be able to tank their hits sometimes, but because player defenses are so variable, we don't want it so that a player who isn't using Fortify can't survive Dureso, and it's tricky. Boss fight design is tricky because yeah, player builds change. Like we're going to have to rebalance these boss fights as players come up with new builds, I can imagine. And
Yeah, right.
I'm excited to see how the final boss fight turns out, because that's got some pretty cray
What
cray
particular
stuff.
part of it, Rory? No, don't tell me. I really don't want to spoiler about that.
The robot elephants are a bit.
Oh,
like,
right.
It was a bit of a tough choice for the art department, but I think it's going to pay off.
I mean, Gemling kind of themed robot ninja elephants or whatever. Right.
Yeah, from the future, obviously, because yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy stuff that's happening in that fight. Fingers crossed it all comes together.
Sweet.
But sadly, I've been spending so much time on balance stuff that I haven't been able to give these bosses the adjustments, the attention they deserve. So I'm hoping to do that some more, give them a bit more fine tuning, get their attack speeds feeling a little smoother. I mean, the timing on an attack, like 10 milliseconds either side, can make all the difference in the world how the whole fight feels. So
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. Like, Exile was the first boss fight that I designed from scratch, and I learned a huge amount from that, and I feel like I've already learned a huge amount from Carmen Dureso, so it's a really fun, like, it's the most fun design stuff, especially like when you're just making the document where it shows the layout of the boss fight and the plan for it, and getting feedback from everyone is really cool. So I'm excited to see how they end up. Like, by no means are they finished, but I think they're looking pretty cool, in my opinion. The art team did a great job with both of them.
So I should be thanking you for the more and more mechanical boss fights we're getting, because I love that about the game, that the boss fights have gotten progressively more and more mechanical.
Yeah, I was a big noob, a big hardcore noob raider in WoW, and big small raider, and I really wanted to see more of that stuff, and a lot of IARPGs recently have been doing some pretty awesome boss fights. So yeah, stepping up the quality of the fights is important to me.
Awesome. Sort of on that topic though, Dureso, I love, like, it's my favorite zone in the game, that Dureso's arena and that. But when I was like sort of breaking down his fight and learning all the mechanics and stuff, apart from the bubble and the bubble healing and like the bubble boost damage, it seems like, as you were saying, he's a bit erratic, but it seems like it's difficult to actually strategize the fight at all, because it's mostly just like, I was like, guys, I think like pretty much just keep running, like just keep running circles, and and that's how you avoid the damage. Like, if you stand still, you'll get wrecked by his cold thing, but there doesn't seem to be much strategy to it. Not like, with Val, where you're like, attack during the phases, don't attack between phases because he'll switch, and run circles for this, and run diagonally away from him, don't run directly out, stuff like that. Is it just that we haven't discovered it yet, or does it need a bit more work?
No, it was very much intended to be, like, it was a very, like, well, Calm was a very bottom-up boss fight. We knew we wanted these AoE mechanics. We knew you wanted a reason to move around the arena frequently. We knew you need flash charges, you need minions, so we get corpses in there. Well, for Dureso, it was very top-down. It was very, we want you to duel this guy one-on-one, like, he's a duelist. It should be a duel. It should be a sword fight. He's using swords. He's going to use versions of, like, powered up versions of player skills, less the this is how the player behavior for the fight. So now we're getting, with the swords appearing in the arena, the spinning sword blade things, that will add a bit more to it. But we do need a bit more in terms of big avoidable attacks. Like, I'm looking at making his big cone attack a lot wider, so it's a reason to stay close to him and things like that.
Cool. Yeah, like what Brutus has got now, where you're far better off being closer to him for that rather than being further away.
Yeah. The Brutus rework with the giant slam across the arena thing was very much intended as anti-range, just because the fight was much easier for range characters. So Dureso needs something similar, or some way to control your movement. But we'll see. we'll see. Maybe more of the clones in less than a circle, not just circle pattern clones, but some like don't stand in this path because clones will be charging back and forth. We'll see. There's still time to iterate, and that is. I mean, I'm not happy with the fight, how it's turned out completely. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the theme. I think, yeah, with a bit more what you're talking about doing, it seems like it could be a really cool fight, so I'm looking forward to that. Because I love the theme, man. If that fight gets, like, to the level of, like, the theme and the feel of that zone, I'll be stoked. I'll be so happy.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the fight, for example, his getting down on one knee was something I wanted in the fight entirely so that the crowd could, like, gasp and cheer as he did it.
Yeah, I love when you kill him, how the crowd's, like, shocked and appalled. That's like, it's awesome. I was like expecting them to cheer for me, and then they were like, I killed their hero.
Yeah.
That was really cool. Rad.
Yeah, that area is very much all flavor, all theme, all. You get to be a gladiator.
Love it.
Which is cool. It's cool.
So back on the hardcore mechanics then. Am I like pushing over time here, or how are you going?
I don't know. You're good. You're good.
Cool.
You've still got time. I'll let you know.
Sweet, Rory. You're killing it, man. You're killing it. The shotgunning change is obviously a big one. We talked a little bit about it, and from the perspective of mobs being less spike damage and insta-killing players, which is lovely. What I usually say, my speculation is generally that... well, actually, no, it's not speculation even. I've talked to you and other people in the past when designing uniques and when you've been designing skills, and you were saying, we couldn't do this because of shotgunning, It's always been, like, the biggest issue for balancing. So, that's the case, right?
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons for the change. There were a lot of good things that came from the change, for both enabling skill development and giving us more balanced control. It's given us some really tough questions, like we really don't know how much of a damage boost Fireball and Arctic Breath should get now that they're not doing this extra bonus. And like Freezing Pulse got a massive damage boost, but potentially not enough just because it's like it no longer has a way of being a large area.
I can agree with that. It's
should have 10 extra projectiles on your totem.
Hold on, let me just get that set up.
But I mean, we turned down the damage penalty on GMP and LMP, but then we needed to turn down Tornado Shot, and there'll be more skills like it that will need to be adjusted downwards because they got they got a full damage increase for every extra projectile. It shifts the design quite a bit for those skills, which is like, I don't like the fact that you need LMP, GMP to make Tornado Shot work, but that was already the case, really. Like, that's never not been the case with Tornado Shot. It's just, if I could get away with it, I'd just have it come with additional projectiles, but we have support gems for that, so...
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea that you added more to Split Arrow, but that's kind of its unique mechanic. And I like that some of them are getting that treatment, but I think that, the support gems are what allow you to have that option. So, I guess I can totally imagine that it's going to be a lot of, like, really redesigning the skills balance back from the ground up now that you've removed such a big mechanic that a lot of them really relied on as a crutch, really. Like, I think Fireball is a good example of this. Both Fireball and Freeze Pulse really are great examples of it, of skills that really lent on shotgunning as a huge crutch. Like, it was the way that they were made viable. And I guess the question is, mechanics changes, like Flame Totem got additional projectiles to give it more AoE, and it seems pretty well balanced overall. Most people are pretty happy with it who have tried it. But I did test Fireball and Freeze Pulse, and I felt both very lacking. Are you looking at doing like mechanics changes to other skills besides just damage buffing?
Yes, there's a few mechanics changes. Fireball was one we want to consider the options for. Currently, it doesn't quite fit into the single target category because it's more effective with additional projectiles, but it's not effective enough with additional projectiles. So we either need to push it closer to single target or further towards AoE, or give it a new mechanic entirely that lets it synergize with skills in another way. So we're looking at options for that. We're probably going to try out the simplest option first, with AoE, and then if it needs more. We're most likely replacing it as a level 2 skill, so you get a different fire skill early on. But that depends on whether the skill actually plays out. So far, it feels pretty cool to play with, but I still need to work on it. It's got some interesting stuff going on there.
Okay. Some of the things like fire. Let's talk about fireball's mechanics specifically because I think it's an interesting example. Without the ability to shotgun, I felt like what it really needs is for the explosions to always happen when it pierces and chains and stuff like that.
Right.
It feels great leveling when you're just using LMP or GMP. But then when you're trying to start scaling up into maps, like that's fine early on, and it's, you know, almost passable in maps, but not really. Like you want to push it up a bit, and that means using chain or PS or fork. But the fact that it just travels through them, almost like not harming them, you know, it feels, that's what I felt most made Fireball feel really lacking. So I guess how would you feel about doing something like adding explosions to every hit?
It's those kind of suggestions that are kind of the trickiest ones because they're simple to do. There's, you know, one designer will say that this perfectly solves all our balance problems, and a second designer will be like, well, then it's not Fireball anymore. Fireball, like, is a projectile that explodes. It's not this crazy repeat exploding thing. It's not like that's closer to ball lightning than it is to classic Fireball. Which, I mean, this is not something that someone said. This is something I'm guessing someone will say because there are a bunch of people in the office that care a lot about that stuff. So trying to find a sweet spot between the two where people are happy with the result. It may be that it has smaller explosions when it pierces or something like that might be the answer. But yeah, we can look at that as an option because yes, that does make sense. That solves a bunch of problems it has. Makes it a lot like Ice Shot, which is good but not too strong with its piercing mechanic.
Okay, yeah, all right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, I look forward to seeing what happens with that. Let me just throw that out there. I'm pushing for the freeze pulse lovers, but I think the biggest change that needs to happen with that is more of just a quality of life one, that the projectiles shouldn't stack if there's no reason for them to. Like, I would like them to intentionally fan out when you added LMP. Right.
We're changing the spread on Lightning Strike. We're trying out a spread on Lightning Strike, so the gap between the projectiles is a set angle, not the total arc of it. So we could easily do something like that to freeze. Well, I say that, but I suspect the programmers can easily do something like that with Freezing Pulse to try that out as well. So
rad.
Yeah. We can try it out. We'll see how it works. I'll let you know.
Good stuff. So, how is... Oh, hold on. This was something, actually, you mentioned to me, I think, a while back, was that there's skills you couldn't implement because of shotgunning. Are you able to say what those skills were? Just in a completely, historical sense, not like these skills will be coming? Disclaimer.
I honestly can't remember off the top of my head. Tornado Shot would have been an example, but then we did a bunch of stuff with Tornado Shot's mechanics so that it could. But I can't tell you off the top of my head. It's something. There's a few things, but like just generally, Fireball. Like we didn't have any more skills like Fireball because of shotgunning.
I know Ball Lightning was one of them, but you ended up having to implement this whole mechanic for that to make it work. It took like months for that to actually get it put in the game because of that.
I mean, our effects artist really wishes Ball Lightning was just a single projectile and there was no way to support it, because then he could make it look twice as big and like make the area much larger, make it look more like Party's Ball Lightning.
But
that ship has flown. Wait, ship has flown? Yeah.
Ship has sailed.
That's the one.
I don't know what's going on down in New Zealand, mate. Flying ships, sailing planes.
Yeah, it's another unreleased skill I can't talk about.
Ah, yes.
Flying ship.
Flying Viking longboat.
Yes. No, Ball Lightning is an example of one we had to do specific mechanic changes for, but it put us off doing projectile spell stuff. I'd like to see more, I guess, Ethereal Knife-like spells now that we can do that. Because, again, Ethereal Knives has its own anti-shotgunning thing in place. Or had its own anti-shotgunning thing before we had the shotgunning change.
Yeah. So, I'm keen for more EK.
Yeah. There was discussion of making a support gem that adds shotgunning back to stuff, but man, that is going to be an incredible balance nightmare. So, I won't make any promises on that regard. We'll see how that plays out, but that would be absolutely horrifying on some skills that previously couldn't shotgun.
Yeah, that was actually what I was going to ask, whether a lot of people ask for like a shotgunning support gem or something. I imagine that'd be a balancing nightmare, but or skills that do have shotgunning mechanics, like the flip side of ball lightning, the opposite of ball lightning.
Yeah, I mean, if we can do it, I'm keen, but again, we balance around the best possible skill to use with it, and whatever that might be is going to mean that the damage penalties on it is going to have to be extreme.
And then it'll only work with that best possible case skill.
Yeah, or we limit it to spells or only attacks or only wands or something. Who knows? Who knows? Could have restrictions, but yeah, the only way to make stuff good is to take stuff away from other things when it comes to that stuff.
Yep. I think the final one people will chastise me if I don't ask about is any thoughts on Incinerate and how it's feeling after the changes. It got hit particularly hard by the changes. I mean, Flame Totem kind of did okay. What about Incinerate?
Yeah, I mean, Flame Totem got a lot of attention because I had just been playing a dual Flame Totem character in the 1 month.
Favoritism.
So it's got to be good, yeah. And I haven't given Incinerate the same touch. The Flame Totem, like, before the shotgunning change, I had given Flame Totem additional projectiles. And then after the change, we removed that, but then I was like, man, it feels so much better with extra projectiles, just in how it looks and how it feels like it's getting stronger when you get LMP. So I just added it back to it as a thing it gets as it levels. Incinerate may get the same thing. I'm being told at the moment that Incinerate is broken on beta and isn't gaining damage per phase, which is why it feels a lot worse than it is.
It's actually
so that's
bugged.
like 300% less damage there. I mean, yeah. Yes. Okay, so that is being fixed.
There you go, guys. That's good news.
So it did get a damage boost. I'm pretty sure we buffed the damage to an equivalent amount to Freezing Pulse. Maybe not Freezing Pulse levels, but yeah. So once that is fixed, I'm keen to see how it plays.
Okay. I was gonna give a suggestion, if I'm still struggling, but I guess if it's getting fixed, there might not be any problems. But the suggestion was that single targeters really struggle for Incinerate now. While the AoE will probably be pretty good still, maybe even better with the damage buffs. A suggestion was something that wouldn't really affect AoE too much, maybe in parties, but is giving it more stacks. So the idea that it can ramp up further, which would give it more boss killing potential, more single target killing potential, and maybe some more use in like party situations, but it wouldn't really benefit the AoE that much because most things are going to be dead before you reach max stacks. Is there any issues with that?
The stack thing's kind of tricky in that it makes it much worse earlier. I mean, cast speed has a huge difference on that stuff, especially with Echo. Wait, does it work like that on Incinerate? I'm pretty sure it does. I mean, yeah, there's an advantage, a lot of in-game advantages that Incinerate has that this would push even further.
Yeah.
And also the fact that we need art for every single stage it has. Like, the art changes, the projectile art changes as you increase in stacks. So that would, mean twice as many projectiles. But I never say never. Someone might listen to this podcast tomorrow and be like, this is what we need to do.
Well, it sounds like at least someone is. I'm hearing that little buzz of messages.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Thanks for tuning in, guys.